Greetings and welcome to Room 303. We are in Senior English B, and we now turn to the Joanna Bailey poem, Wooed and Married and Awe. I'm on page 740, 741 and following. We have looked at already now the poetry of Burns and the dialect that was so difficult for a number of us to read until we heard a professional reader reading it. We're now going to turn to a little poem that is going to help us with two things. So we want to write this down. One of these will be at 2A, one of these will be at 2B. Let's start at 2B. This is a poem that is a little bit difficult to read until we hear it read out loud. And so we're going to want to hear, again, we're concentrating again on this dialectic thing, this dialect thing, the way people can use words in English, and it sounds a little bit different. The other has to do with the understanding of marriage, okay? In this poem, you're going to begin with the bride being sad over her lack of stuff, finery, possessions, and therefore the prospect of marrying someone who has more wealth than she, right? Secondly, you're going to hear the bride's parents who are going to say to her that, you shouldn't be so worried in that regards. You ought to just be happy anyone is willing to marry you, given your poverty, right? The bridegroom, though, knows how to manage her anxiety, and he will proclaim that the bride herself is wealth enough for him, and then pleased by the flattery, she gives up her worrying and goes off to be married. Of course, this is that question of marriage as economics. Let's write that down at 2A. Marriage as economics. It's not always about love as much as it's about money. In this poem, though, we're going to recognize an interesting movement then, a back and forth. We're going to go ahead, just like we did with Burns, and we're going to listen now to a professional reader of this poem. Just follow along with the tip of your pen and see how well you can do now with this poem. Here we go.
Wooed and Married and Awe by Joanna Bailey. The bride, she is winsome and bonny, her hair it is snooded sae sleek, and faithful and kind is her Johnny, yet fast for the tears on her cheek. New pearlings are cause of her sorrow, new pearlings and plenishings too. The bride that has awe to borrow has e'en right mickle ado. Wooed and married and awe, wooed and married and awe. Isna she very well off to be wooed and married at all? Her mither then hastily spak, the lassie is glaikit with pride. In my pooch I had never a plaque on the day when I was a bride. Ain't that your wheel and be clever, and draw out your thread in the sun? The gear that is gifted, it never will last like the gear that is won. Wooed and married and all, we havings and tushers sae small. I think you're very well off to be wooed and married at all. Toot toot,
742.
Grey-headed feather. She's less o' a bride than a bairn. She's ta'en like a coot frae the heather, with sense and discretion to learn. Half husband I trow and half daddy, as humouring constantly leans. The chiel maun be patient and steady, that yokes wi' a mate in her teens. A kerchief sae douce and sae neat, o'er her locks that the wind used to blow. I'm baith like to laugh and to greet, when I think of her married at all. Then out spak the wily bridegroom, weel were his wordies a ween. I'm rich, though my coffer be toom wi' the blinks o' your bonny blue een. I'm prouder o' thee by my side, though thy ruffles or ribbons be few, than if Kate o' the Croft were my bride, with purfles and pearlings enow. Dear and dearest of Onnie, you're wood and bouquet and all, and do you think scorn o' your Johnny, and grieve to be married at all? She turned, and she blushed, and she smiled, and she looked so bashfully doon. The pride of her heart was beguiled, and she played with the sleeves of her gown. She twirled the tag o' her lace, and she knit her bodice sae blue. Sign blinkets sae sweet in his face, and off like a mawkin she flew. Wooed and married and all, with Johnny to ruse her and all. She thinks herself very well off to be wooed and married at all.
Okay, so let's turn now to the poem quickly. The first thing let's say it to be about this poem, and you heard it, didn't you, is the amazing sing-song-like effect of the language. Did you notice this? In fact, your Scottish reader, the professional reader, it almost sounds like she is singing this poem more than speaking this poem. So let's say that it to be right away. The magic of language that can capture the dialect, the Scottish dialect, that allows for this poem to have that beautiful kind of rhythm. Let's notice that there's a three-part dance to this little poem, right? Part one, of course, on page 741, is that we are told that this bride who is about to be married is sad because she is poor and she has nothing, right? The second movement of the poem is then going to be the speakers who will try to, in some ways, console her. Maybe console. Notice, for example, in the first stanza, notice on 741, she says it, that it even doesn't have a mickle, right? That is to say, much. There's not much that she has, right? And therefore sad. Notice Mom, starting at line 13, says, hey, don't be so proud, right? You're lucky to have any guy that's willing to marry you, right? So count yourself blessed that you have anyone. The father on page 742 says the same thing. He's just happy that she has somebody who she is, she's able to marry. Also, notice that father is very proud of daughter in terms of the kind of girl that she is. This is that old distinction that we might jot down at 2a, the difference between being beautiful on the outside and beautiful on the inside. The third speaker in the second part is her guy, the bridegroom. Notice he says it on page 742, line 39. I'm rich, though my coffer be tomb, which means empty. In other words, I'm really wealthy, even though I don't have a dime to my name because I'm marrying a poor girl like you. I'm prouder, he says, to have you by my side than any other girl who would have all of the money and all of the nice clothes and all of that. In other words, you are my prize. I don't need a large dowry. The third and final part of the poem, of course, is then how she responds. So notice the poem begins with her, ends with her, right? She will, of course, end with the response. She blushes, she smiles, and then off she flies to get married. She is a happy girl now because she has been told, I don't need your money, I don't need anything from you, I just need you because you're so beautiful and I love you so much. End of poem. Okay, let's jot down really quickly at 2a some possible messages, themes here. Obviously, one is that whole economics thing of do you marry for money or do you marry for love? This poem obviously suggests that love is way more important than money, right? Obviously, as well, you have a family theme going on here, don't you? You've got the young girl who is going to get married, but she doesn't have any money, and she's kind of sad about this, and mother has something to say, like she should just be happy you're getting married at all. And daddy's little girl, of course, he's so proud of her. And then, of course, bridegroom is able to say, no, you're perfect just the way you are. And so you've got this interesting family dynamic at play as well. At 2b, obviously, we've mentioned already this amazing language, right? Again, it almost reads like a song of a kind, right? It's beautiful. It reminds us very much at 3a. Now let's go to other texts. Very much of Burns's To a Mouse, To a Louse. No question why these three poems are kind of joined together, from To a Mouse, To a Louse, and then this one. Of course, we could ask some other interesting questions at 3a about other titles that come to mind. Think of, for example, Romeo and Juliet. When we meet Lord Capulet for the first time, he's talking with Paris, and Paris wants to marry Capulet's daughter, Juliet, right? Again, it's got nothing to do with love. Remember what Juliet's dad says. Why don't you at least meet her first? Paris has never actually met this girl. That's the whole point of the party later that evening, where, of course, Romeo will meet Juliet on the dance floor, right? In other words, marriage is more about money and economics than it is about love, right? What is for you another title that comes to mind about marriage? What is your favorite movie that has to do with marriage? Are you at all familiar with this notion in movies, sometimes we have this game that gets played, right? Where you will have a very wealthy, one of the guy or girl, very wealthy, and then the other one will become from a very poor family, and then how that one sometimes doesn't work out so well, right? We're familiar with any number of really famous kinds of movies that play this kind of stereotype, right? Finally, let's ask this question in regards to marriage. What do you think? How do you think views of marriage has changed? Do you think it's still the case that people of a certain class economically like to marry within their class, right? Again, back to 3A for just a split second. We think of West Side Story as a famous musical that plays along with the same game, right? This idea, don't we? Right? What are your thoughts of that? Have things changed in regards to the whole notion of marriage? So, for example, do you, as a senior, for example, do you feel like you have to kind of start worrying about who you're going to marry someday? Or do you think that that's something that is not as big a deal anymore? Do you think families talk as much about it, right? Did you grow up, for example, in a family where people talk to you about getting married and who you would marry and all of those kinds of things? And is that a source of anxiety at all? Of course, it does beg a final question. If you were to ever marry someday, who do you think you would marry? What kind of person? A person very much like you? A person quite different from you? Financially, do you kind of see yourself in the same ballpark? Would you want to marry somebody, for example, who comes from tremendous wealth if you don't? Or vice versa? Well, there you go. An introduction to married, wooed, and awe.